Being a longtime Digimon fan for years, I'm always surprised to see that Digimon Digital Monsters has been able to have and achieve longevity ever since its birth in the late 1990s, and still being admired for its fictional digital concept. Digimon came out at a time where there seemed to be a monster fad going around, with Pokemon being the most notable. While Digimon never reached the level of Pokemon's popularity, it was still making fans with its creation of the digital pet, its card game, and probably most notably, its anime series. Time has been the deciding factor and judge for these monster franchises, while its pale contemporaries have been lost to time and Pokemon's been kept alive by its impulsive collectible junkies. Digimon has proven that it could stand on its own and has shown that it always did have merit. One amazing accomplishment that sticks out in my mind when you talk about Digimon as a franchise is the creation of Digimon the Movie, a feature-length film that was released in the autumn of 2000. I'm sure you have fond memories where I learned about a Digimon movie coming out, and I consider it to be one of the best movie experiences I ever had, especially since I saw it with a best friend who was also a fan. When talking about Digimon the Movie, I think Digimon fans then and now don't comprehend just how big of a deal this was, to have Digimon on the silver screen. When it comes to more familiar and older franchises, it's more easy to make a film adaptation since you already have an established fan base that's been growing with it over the years, and will go see them, if nothing more, than out of curiosity. Digimon may have had its fan base, but it didn't have that kind of attention to give it mainstream success. So there was no reason at all to release this in theaters. It could have easily been a direct-to-video release. But despite the success or reputation, someone gave the green light to have this in theaters. An example like this is the reason why I always consider Digimon to be an underdog. It always treated itself as a high profile even if others looked the other way and saw no significance to it. The movie that was presented was a combination of 3 short films rolled into one: Digimon Adventure, Our War Game, and Digimon Hurricane Touchdown. And one complaint that people point out is how hazy and uneven the presentation of this film is by lumping together these films. It's a coherent mess, there's no real story, a lot was cut from the original versions, but does it still try to make a reasonable story with the few pieces it's got? The best way to review this film is to break down each segment and see what each act does with its own story, and see how all 3 parts affect the overall story the movie is trying to tell. We start off with a young Tai and Kari who meet their first Digimon, Koromon, and this leads to the Heightened View Terrace event where a wild Digimon, Parrotmon, appears, and the now evolved Greymon fights him off, and both are sent back to the digital world. The first thing you'll notice is the voice of Kari working as narrator throughout most of the film. Since this is a mix of 3 different stories, this narration is made to work as a loose narrative to tie the movie together, and to give some exposition on who's who and on the events that unfold. Fans might roll their eyes at this since they already know about the status quo from the TV series, but this is a smart move to do. It's made for the people in the audience who are not Digimon fans to understand the backstory and not to be left behind and wonder what's going on, and to build some interest in a story they don't know about. But we don't have to be told about every other thing that happens in a scene when Kari points it out. I'm sure we can figure that out ourselves. The segment plays off as a fun tomfoolery piece with Tai, Kari, and the Digimon for the first half, and then builds to a suspenseful and action climax to finish the segment. There's not much to talk about in terms of plot. This first act is just to get the ball rolling and to start off at some jumping point. It does set the tone for the emotional impact moments for the rest of the film. The action, the humor, the thrills, and all these elements are balanced so well that anybody can appreciate and enjoy the entertainment being shown here for what it is, despite the simplicity of this first part. In fact, I think this could have been good enough for American fans' first introduction into Digimon, instead of starting off with the series. It would have made it a bigger curiosity to check the show out and put things in a better perspective. Oh well. One thing I find funny is how you have this battle between 2 Digimon in this one area, and yet only the kids on the block see this event happen and no one else does. I guess everybody worked so hard that day, or they're very heavy sleepers. Years after the events of Season 1's adventure, a mysterious Digimon appears on the internet one day that also happens to be infected with a virus. Izzy explains that this Digimon appears to be more dangerous than it seems to be, and it happened to be created by this kid named Willis. More on him later. Tai and Izzy then try to round up the rest of the group, but they're only able to get Matt and TK to join the fight against the virus, and they can't get in contact with the other members for reasons beyond their control. And if things couldn't get worse, the evil virus plans to solve all its problems with a few Mushroom Clouds. Our War Game is in itself a well-crafted piece of adventure storytelling and is a great example of what Digimon has to offer at its best as an anime. The thing that makes Our War Game so enduring is how everything in the segment just emotionally interacts with one another. If it be a moment of comedy, a sense of suspense, or just a random conversation between two characters. The series always treat the Digidestined as fleshed out characters who over time become very likable and relatable characters who have something to gain and learn. And we become so invested in their trials and tribulations that you end up wanting to see more from this type of crew. So when we see the group in this segment, we see that charm and interesting characteristics come off the screen, even if they're on their off time. When you talk about the plot, which is by all means a very simple plot, bad guy shows up, good guys have to fight the bad guy and good guy fight back and forth, the good guys defeat the bad guy in the end. And yet, the scope of this segment feels much more grand and epic than it should be, and that's due to the investment the script puts into the relationship of the characters and the weight of their situation. The performances from the cast also add to the quality and enjoyment to the segment. Everyone puts 100% effort into their roles, and you really get that sense of camaraderie coming from the main cast. Characters that have such a close history and great understanding with each other, we know how they function off their strengths and weaknesses to make a good character, as much as the actors who know how to bring out that believability in the performance. It is a bit disappointing that the entire group doesn't assemble together and are not present here, even if the other members only make cameos, so that we can have that charming camaraderie like there was in the series. But I think one can argue that by only having a few teammates to fight the foe, it builds suspense by making the impossibility of their situation more heavy. Some credit should be given when it comes to the humor, which makes up for most of the lighthearted moments here. Fans always complain that the humor in the series was way too corny for its own good. That's because the show was under heavy micromanagement, and Jeff Nemore, creative head for the majority of the English crew of Digimon, would have made the series into a show with the same kind of tone that's in Our War Game. The humor comes off genuinely funny here, and doesn't feel contrived for the sake of having humor, and only having sour comments coming from the Digimon at times. Speaking of lighter moments, there's a nice little treat for fans as the film showcases the banter between Tai and Sora's developing relationship. It doesn't have to do with anything in the overall movie, but for nothing else, it shows this character development that's happening in the background, and if you keep track of the series, you'll see this as a pivotal moment. For others, it just adds to the fun tomfoolery going on. The virus that develops into Digimon is one of the best villains in Digimon's rogues gallery. What makes him so impressive is that he's able to accomplish so much in so little time. He's able to evolve into his other forms so quick, he doesn't have to go through a processing stage like the other Digimon do, deliver a beating to opponents in minutes, showing how powerful he is and how invulnerable he is in battle, travel from one place to another in a matter of moments, duplicate himself into millions of Digimon copies while simultaneously able to obtain and control 2 nuclear missiles to throw at our heroes. Seeing how powerful and multitasking Digimon is, he's got a reference sheet that would make the majority of Digimon villains blush. While Digimon shows that he's an interesting threat, we don't explore him as a Digimon or even as an entity, his motives for why he's doing for what he's doing. Though I like the scene where he's calling everyone in the world and happens to call Tai and give the line, "Hello, did you program me?" in a sinister sarcasm way, just to show off some personality. By having such an unstoppable force, you've got to have some major backup. This is where we see the introduction of Omnimon, and just from his appearance alone you can tell this Digimon commands a majestic magic and is a force to be reckoned with, like that of Superman, and his very introduction is, without a doubt, one of the best scenes in the film, if not the best. It's also our first introduction to a DNA Digimon, which is talked about later in the second season, which has to do with the ability of Digimon combining together to make a new digital monster. Our War Game could be marked as the highlight of this film since it has so much to offer, and even as a standalone movie, it would still be great as an action-packed piece. It's been said that the original intention was to make the first segment and Our War Game, and only use these 2 shorts to be the entirety of the Digimon movie. Though I think that wouldn't have been enough to validate a theater release, and would have fell short in running time, unless the filmmakers had something else in mind to put in and use that as the third act. It should be noted that while Our War Game and Hurricane Touchdown are not in continuity with Season 1 and 2 respectively, they are both intertwined by the same story in this movie's context, and Hurricane Touchdown leaves right off after the events of Our War Game. With that being said, Hurricane Touchdown is, sad to say, a really dull and, may I add, depressing disappointment in the progress of the storyline. For all of its accomplishments, War Game was able to achieve interest and set up expectations, so you would think that Touchdown would be just as grand or even better in its scope. But strangely, this segment does the opposite, and the final execution of Hurricane Touchdown is a pale, restrained, downsized concept for a story. The plot falls victim to one of the worst ideas you can have for storytelling, where the whole plot centers around the group to get from one point to another with nothing interesting happening in between their journey, and we go through this already boring act to begin with, just to end up in the middle of nowhere in some abandoned county next to the Rocky Mountains. I find it ironic that our war game story mainly took place in a room, and yet you were invested and on the edge of your seat. Hurricane Touchdown takes the Season 2 team out in the open and around some places, and yet their adventure is as dull as dishwater. I'm not blaming the lack of interest on the characters. The script doesn't give them anything to do to bring out any kind of personal charm, and don't have much of an environment to interact with. Maybe they could have gone to a place like a beach park, a small town, a sky bridge, Disneyland, anywhere really. When facing the kind of threat they face, there should be some high stakes on the line, and having the team interacting with people they meet with the kind of situation they're in would bring out that kind of character and give us a reason to care. Speaking of people, one thing I kind of find funny is how the group, no matter where they go, there seems to be no signs of people anywhere. Even when TK and Kari are in New York, it looks empty. For some reason we see Kari and TK at the start of the segment and don't see them again until the very end, and there's no explanation as to why it took them so long to catch up with the team. Now's a good time to bring up Willis, since he's finally put into the forefront of the film. Willis is the linchpin that puts everything into motion in the movie, and is the cause of the evil virus that's unleashed, and we can tell that he's going to have to clean up this mess that he started. So Willis is built up as his vocal point, and by the time we get to him, he should be this character that we have sympathy for, and be invested in because of this nightmare scenario he puts himself in. But at the end of the day, Willis's character is not that big of a deal. One thing he should have realized was how dangerous the virus was from all the destruction it caused. That is, if it went around causing damage to people, places, and things. And see the kind of burden he made for himself so that it would validate the remorse that's been building up inside and make his arc have more impact. The plot denies such big consequences to take place to make this happen, and this also leads to another problem with Willis's conflict, and that his conflict is portrayed as way too personal. When anyone tries to get Willis to explain what's going on and what he has to do with all this, his response is giving the cold shoulder and leaving the rest of the team out in the cold, and he only spills the beans until their last fight with the virus. This is a dumb move to make on Willis's part, and a bad way to make a first impression. Why not offer help in a problem you're in from the start, especially when you see others who happen to have Digimon too? Willis also says he's been fighting off the virus that's been following him for 4 years, and has done fine on his own with his partner Terriermon. But after seeing how the virus attacks him and comes after him, and how the virus is ultimately defeated by the end of the film, just shows that Willis could have taken care of this situation all by himself. Really, having him team up with the Digidestined doesn't add or take away from his strategy or the way he fights his battles. It gives an excuse to have more Digimon on the screen, but ultimately, the other members of the team don't do anything that Willis couldn't have done also. All he had to do was find a way to get Terriermon to Golden Armor evolve and find out that the virus's weakness was from inside. So this really begs the question, why have the Digidestined in here in the first place, if they don't give out anything to help out the fight? And doesn't this make them superfluous? This should also bring up Kokomon, the Digimon that the virus embodies. The virus in this is a letdown, since it didn't follow up as his apocalypse-like virus that it was building up in the last segment. After seeing all the things the virus did as Diaboromon, it shows that it's pretty powerful. Powerful enough to even turn back time as shown near the end. So when we see this guy, he should be leaving damage behind that would take out half a city. Instead, it has fights that are equivalent to back alley brawls. With all that said, there are two things I like in this plot. I think this story gives good reason why Davis is qualified for being leader of the team. Even if Davis comes off as a character with a one-track mind, he's fully aware of the situation he's in. He knows what the goal is, and he takes care of it. And if the morale seems down, he comes in, sees what the problem is, tries to find the answer so that the team doesn't fall apart. Terriermon looks like a fun Digimon to be around with, and looks like he packs a lot of punch while wielding both Gatling guns and explosive rockets. His type of voice suits his character very well, and while this was his introduction, we would get to see more of him in the third season of Digimon. For what it is, Digimon the movie tells a good enough story with the material it's working with, despite its limitations. The animation is more fluid than in the show, and while it doesn't look as polished like it was in the series, it didn't bug me, and the acting from the cast is well done. As it stands, I would recommend this to anyone who wants to get into Digimon. Like a compilation album, this is a good introduction for what to expect from Digimon as an anime. But the only thing is, the show is not on DVD yet, so you really can't check out the show even if you wanted to. This movie does lose some points though, since Hurricane Touchdown is so weak, it might as well come off as a cop-out. So with that said, Digimon the movie gets a 2.5 out of 4.